Only a miracle allowed me to find this house. The blizzard had calmed down. The wind had stopped howling over the forest, no longer making the trees creak and groan. The snow was now falling slowly, swirling in the air and settling on the branches. And then, finally, I stumbled upon it. Only me. My companions had long since gotten lost, left behind, perhaps even perished. I didn't know. 6 of us had entered the forest. We had only a rough idea of the area where we should search, and for many hours we wandered in circles. In the evening twilight, we encountered a pack of wolves that glared at us with their yellow eyes and bared their fangs, but did not attack. Naively, we thought the worst was behind us. Then the blizzard began. Gusts of icy wind hurled sharp ice shards at us, stinging our skin and eyes. The cold seeped through our warm clothing, wrapping us in icy chains. We realized we wouldn't survive if we didn't find shelter and kept standing still. Starting a fire, of course, was impossible. So we trudged through the storm, struggling with our last ounces of strength to stay together. But eventually, we separated. I don't know how, but the 2 at the rear vanished without a trace. Perhaps one fell and the other went to help, while the rest of us moved on. They might have called out, but the wind drowned their voices. Then I tripped and tumbled into a ravine. I don't know why my companions didn't follow me down, but I can only hope they had a good reason. In any case, I was somewhat lucky. There, in the ravine, waist deep in snow, I found shelter under a fallen tree and waited out the blizzard. To say I was cold is a vast understatement. My toes had gone numb, and icicles had formed on my beard, mustache, and eyebrows. I was also terribly tired and so hungry that my stomach ached. I desperately wanted to curl up and sleep, escaping all the hardships of this world, but I wasn't ready to give up so easily. I gathered my strength and climbed out of the ravine. At first, I hoped to find my companions, but no matter how much I called out, there was no answer. Only an owl hooted somewhere overhead. I was surrounded by the darkness of the night forest and the winter cold. So I continued to wander alone through the forest. And yet, by fate or destiny, it was I who was destined to reach our goal. A single-story stone house, like a small tower, part of a castle that had sunk into the ground, stood in the middle of a small clearing. Its conical roof was covered with a thick layer of snow, and the black wall of the forest loomed on all sides, the trees almost touching it with their branches, like ugly giant paws. Only a faint, flickering light in the oval window kept me from passing by. Sinking knee-deep in the snow, I began to approach. On the way, I took off the long leather case from my back and, unfolding it, revealed my main Wapona hatchet. I was a lumberjack, not a warrior, but I knew how to wield an axe well, and now was the time when my skills would come in handy in a different way. My fingers were stiff under the woolen gloves, but as soon as I gripped the handle of my axe, they filled with strength. The weight of the tool gave me confidence, and the gleaming blade dispelled the fear of the unknown that awaited me ahead. I approached the house, but didn't rush to burst inside. First, I needed to scout the situation, so I headed toward the window, trying to step as quietly as possible. A faint flickering light streamed through the thick glass. I crouched down and peered inside. I expected to see a fireplace or some candles, but there was nothing like that inside. The murky glass barely allowed me to see the interior, but I could easily make out the main element. In the center of the house stood a tall, fluffy fir tree. It towered over its surroundings, and the light emanated directly from it. On the branches of the tree hung small glass balls, each containing a tiny flame that flickered like a candle. I couldn't see anything else, no matter how hard I tried, nor were there any sounds. It seemed as if the house was empty, but that could be deceptive, as I had no idea who or what I was dealing with here. Still, I couldn't sit by the window forever. Gathering all my courage, I approached the door again. There were no locks or latches on it, and taking hold of the massive steel handle, blackened with age, I pulled the heavy door toward me. I wanted to do this as quietly as possible, but the rusty hinges betrayed me with a creak. I froze, listening. Nothing. There wasn't a sound in the house. Then I pulled the door toward me again. The creak seemed to cut through the thick silence of the forest like a knife, but no living creature responded to the sound. I didn't open the door all the way. When the opening was wide enough for me to squeeze through, I straightened up and, once again ensuring that absolute silence reigned inside, stepped into the semi-darkness. I pulled the door closed behind me. I decided that if the owner returned while I was inside, I could ambush him. Tightly gripping the axe, I walked across the stone floor covered in moss. The house consisted of a single oval room, its walls adorned with frost patterns. The smell here was revolting, like a beast's den and old blood, dampness, and mold. I saw no household items, tables, chairs, beds, or dishes. Only a massive wrought iron chest stood to the right of the entrance. To the left, in the floor, a dark rectangle marked a descent underground. Stepping in that direction, I could make out stone steps leading into the darkness. I certainly didn't want to go down there. The enormous, light-adorned fir tree stood out starkly against the gloomy surroundings. It grew in the center of the house, from the floor to the very ceiling. Its needles were black, and the branches were decorated with the skulls of various animals and birds. But most striking were the glass balls with little flames inside. I stepped closer and peered at one. There was no wick or anything else that would allow the small flame to burn. The flame simply hung there, flickering. As I gradually focused on its silhouette, I began to discern human features. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but no, the flickering flame indeed depicted a figure, a child's figure. The realization weighed heavily on me. I couldn't believe it was possible, but my eyes insisted otherwise. A little girl in a dress with two long braids was trapped inside the glass ball. Still not trusting my eyes, I cautiously touched the ball, and suddenly the house filled with the girl's ringing laughter. The girl laughed heartily. My heart stopped, my breath caught. I jerked my hand back and stepped away, trying to comprehend what was happening, but my thoughts were jumbled. My head spun, a lump of nausea rose in my throat, and I doubled over, pressing my hands into my knees and trying to overcome the emotions that had seized me. A chill ran through my entire body, far more intense than any the cold could bring. Meanwhile, the girl's ringing laughter faded as the ball stopped swaying on the branch, and the resonant silence returned. I quickly regained control over my body and straightened up, looking at the fir tree again. Up until that moment, I hadn't believed that the old wives' tales could be true. But looking at these balls now, I knew for certain that a child was trapped inside each one, and there was no need to count them. There were exactly 36 balls on the tree. That was precisely the number of children in our town who had suddenly, one evening, stopped laughing. They had also stopped playing and talking, eating and drinking. They remained alive but seemed dead. They sat, staring into space, unresponsive to anything. The doctors were at a loss, not knowing what terrible fate had befallen the children. And some townsfolk began to talk about seeing a tall man dressed as St. Nicholas the night before the tragedy. A red coat, a long gray beard, and a huge sack on his back. He supposedly talked to the children, showing them some tricks, but no one knew who this stranger was or how to find him. Only an ancient, blind old woman had an answer. She told us about a house that had stood in the heart of the forest for hundreds of years, and about its inhabitant who appears in especially cold and harsh winters on the eve of Christmas, pretending to be a kind old man, stealing children's souls. It was hard to believe, but what wouldn't a parent do to bring their child back? And now, looking at the fir tree, I knew for sure that one of the balls contained my daughter. A cold sweat broke out over my body. I couldn't calm my wildly beating heart, and I slowly circled the tree, searching for that very ball. My ball. However, an unexpected crack in the forest suddenly distracted me from this search and reminded me that the owner of the house might be nearby. I froze and listened. The crack came again, louder this time. Crouching down, I rushed to the window. It was very difficult to see anything outside. The forest was shrouded in darkness. But still, against the white snow, I could make out a shapeless shadow moving toward the house. The owner was returning. What to do? My thoughts raced at a devilish speed. At first, I wanted to stand by the door and, as soon as he entered, strike him with the axe. Then I decided that since I didn't know what I was dealing with, something clearly supernatural, I needed to act more cautiously. What if the axe blow doesn't have the desired effect? Now I had to survive, no matter what. Not for myself, for the children hanging on the tree like holiday ornaments. If I perished, perhaps no one else would be able to get here, and our children would never come back to life. My daughter would never laugh again. The cracking of branches could now be heard very close by. I could hear the snow crunching under heavy footsteps. I needed to decide on a course of action immediately so as not to be caught off guard. Looking around the house again, I realized my options were limited. Chest or basement? I rushed to the chest. You might say it was foolish since I didn't know what was inside. Do you think you would have chosen to descend into the darkness? Be glad you weren't faced with such a choice. Opening the chest, I found only a pile of white and red rags at the bottom. There was plenty of space left, and I climbed inside, closing the lid but leaving a small gap to peek through. The door creaked loudly as it swung open. I froze, pressing my hand against my mouth and nose to muffle my breathing. Though my heart was pounding so loudly, it seemed it could be heard anywhere in the forest. I tensed all my muscles, trying to stop my body from shaking, but I still trembled like a leaf in the wind. A true giant entered the house, stepping heavily on the rotten planks. He was 2 heads taller than me, and I was considered tall among my peers, and twice as broad in the shoulders. Wrapped in some furs up to his head, he dragged the carcass of a deer behind him, its antlers scraping against the stones, the air filled with the smell of fresh blood. Leaving the carcass on the floor, he paused for a few seconds. It was hard to see through the narrow gap what he was doing, but for a moment, it seemed as if the owner knew of my presence, was looking straight at the chest where I was hiding, and was preparing to attack. I gripped my axe tighter, ready to fiercely fight for my life against this creature, but he didn't move, and then I realized he wasn't looking at me. He was gazing at his wonderful, terrifying fir tree, admiring it. Then I saw a pale hand with long fingers emerge from under the firs. It reached for one of the balls. I barely suppressed the urge to jump out of my hiding place and lunge at him. The thought that this creature would touch the ball containing a child's soul, possibly my daughter's, filled me with fury. Anger replaced fear, but I didn't let either emotion take control. I had to think rationally. That was the only way I could defeat this creature. When he touched the ball, the house filled again with children's laughter. This time, a boy laughed joyfully and carefree. My heart clenched. I thought I recognized that laugh. The neighbor's boy or not. But did it matter? They were all children who had been kidnapped and imprisoned for the amusement of this supernatural creature. I had to save them all. Not just my daughter, but every single one. How else could I go on living? The owner of the house made a guttural, throaty sound that could vaguely be taken for a chuckle. He seemed to be trying to mimic the laughter coming from the ball, but there was no joy in that sound. No emotion at all, just a soulless imitation. A wind, a stone, or a stream could have laughed with as much feeling. When the child's laughter faded, the owner of the house picked up the carcass again and began to descend. That was my chance. Waiting any longer made no sense. It was unlikely he planned to leave the house again anytime soon. I couldn't hide there forever. When his footsteps faded, I pushed the lid open and was about to stand up, but then I noticed the rags I was lying on. They were clothes, a red coat, pants, a belt, and underneath, boots with spurred the attire of St. Nicholas, in which he went out into the forest and lured children. And there was the white beard. Turning it over, I could barely suppress a scream of horror. It was attached to a face, the nose, the cheeks. It was a mask. But it was so lifelike that there was no doubt it was made of human skin. The footsteps on the stairs sounded again. The creature was coming up. I quickly climbed out of the chest and began to sneak toward the opening in the floor. There were no other options, and I decided to attack first, taking advantage of the element of surprise. One precise blow with the axe to the head, delivered from above, should split the creature's skull. Whoever or whatever it wasn't a ghost or a spirit, it was flesh and blood. Otherwise, why would it bring meat into the house? It needs to eat just like us, which means it can be killed just like us, was my reasoning. Taking a position behind the opening where it would be hardest for it to see me from below, I gripped the handle of the axe and froze, trying not to even breathe. I didn't have to wait long. Soon, heavy footsteps sounded, and a moment later, a bald head appeared. The skin on it was wrinkled and dried out, turned gray like tree bark, and a yellow skull shone through it. The creature was coming up. I raised the axe above my head. I inhaled through my nostrils. The giant paused on the steps, then it suddenly turned around and met my gaze. Its face had no nose, just two ugly holes, and its eyes had no pupils, only a white film stared at me. With a cry, I brought the axe down on the creature's head, which I was now certain was not human. I felt the blade pierce the skull and barely managed to keep the handle from slipping out of my hands. The giant's body crashed onto the steps and rolled down. I froze, listening. Silence. If the monster was still alive, it was stunned. Is it possible to survive such a blow? I was certain that the axe had pierced the creature's head. Still, I had no desire to go down and check its condition. Instead, I quickly began searching for something to wrap the balls in. A thought occurred to me. He must have brought them here in something. I was right and easily found a large red sack in the chest. I took it out, opened it, and headed toward the fir tree. One by one, I began removing the balls from the branches and carefully placing them in the sack. The children laughed, saying something incomprehensibly, as if playing some incredibly fun game. The cacophony of these sounds filled the house, turning the night forest thicket into a playground. Just imagine, in the darkness of the winter forest, dozens of children's voices are laughing. It's a good thing I didn't have time to think about it. Taking one of the balls in my hand, I suddenly froze. I recognized that laugh. Bright, mischievous. The laugh that had been so missing in my home for the past few days. Her laugh. My daughter was in this ball, and looking closely at the flame inside, I could see her dancing silhouette. Tears welled up in my eyes. I couldn't deny myself the pleasure of holding this ball in my hand a little longer than the others, feeling the warmth emanating from it, filling my body with strength and my mind with determination. For her, I was ready to move mountains. For her, I was ready to battle Satan himself, just to hear that laugh again. Overcoming the emotions that engulfed me and wiping away a tear that rolled down my cheek, I put the ball away, but not with the others. I placed it in the pocket of my coat and continued to gather the children's souls into the sack. Soon, I had collected all the ones I could reach, but about a dozen balls remained out of reach. They hung too high. There was no ladder, of course. At first, I thought of using the chest, but even dragging it to the fir tree was beyond my strength. Then I remembered that I was a lumberjack, and the axe was meant not for smashing skulls, though it had served that purpose, but for chopping trees. Taking my tool in hand, I assumed my usual stance. I rolled my shoulders, cracked my neck, and got to work. The blade entered the fir tree at an angle and sank deep into the trunk. Good, so it won't take many strikes. The remaining balls trembled on the branches, and the children laughed again. To their cheerful, joyful laughter, I struck the trunk again and again. Falling into a familiar rhythm, I immediately lost my fear and doubts. Even the fatigue vanished. I knew what I had to do. The wood cracked, the children laughed, and I kept swinging the axe. Soon the tree cracked, and to the children's merry laughter, it crashed to the floor with a roar. Thick, black resin poured from the trunk onto the floor. I had never seen anything like it in all my years of working with trees. But then again, I had never encountered fir trees with black needles before. I quickly gathered the last balls. Now, I had to return the children home. Tying the sack, I slung it over my back, took the axe, and rushed out of the hut. The forest greeted me with darkness and snow, in which my legs immediately began to sink, making movement difficult. The sack shook, and children's laughter spread around. Reflecting off the tree trunks, it scattered like an echo, and as I ran, it seemed as if the children were laughing from all sides around me. As if their ghosts were running around, playing, not realizing how close they were to perishing. But I hadn't gone 100 steps from the house when I heard a roar behind me. A furious and terrifying roar of a wounded animal. The creature had awakened. I hadn't killed the monster, only wounded it, and now it was thirsty for revenge. I looked back. I didn't want to, but I couldn't help myself, and my heart filled with terror when I saw the giant silhouette rushing toward me through the night. The monster was fast, much faster than me. I tried to speed up, but with horror, I heard its raspy breathing getting closer, the branches cracking on its path, while I, sinking knee-deep in the snow, was exhausting myself. The sack weighed me down, and the axe also felt heavier in my hand. The thought of dropping them crossed my mind. If I drop the sack, maybe the giant will fall behind, stop the chase, and I can escape. The ball with my daughter's soul was in my pocket. The most precious thing remained with me. And the others. They're not my children. Should I die for them? I'll return and tell the others about this house. Finding it again won't be difficult. We'll find it, come in a crowd, and kill the monster. Save the children, and if not, well, the main thing is to save her. Her alone. She is the most precious, the dearest thing in my life. I must save her, no matter the cost. I'm telling it like it is. Those were the shameful thoughts that took hold of me at that moment. Fear and panic were taking over, and I almost let go of the sack. Almost. But my fingers didn't unclench. I couldn't allow myself to do that. The giant caught up with me. I felt its hot, foul breath on my neck. I turned around, ready to fight, but it swatted me aside like a fly on its path. I rolled through the snow, hitting my back against a tree trunk. Pain shot through my spine, and bright circles sparkled before my eyes. The axe and the sack fell from my hands, and when I could see again, I found the giant right above me. It grabbed me by the throat, and its sharp, broken nails dug into my skin. The monster lifted me into the air like a rag doll and slammed me against the trunk. Dangling in its grip, I realized how pitiful and weak I was against this ancient, supernatural force. The axe blow had struck the creature on the left side of its forehead. Now there was a black hole there, but there was no blood, only the same black resin that had flowed from the fir tree I had felled, covering the edges of the wound, trickling down its forehead in a viscous stream. White eyes stared at me, its mouth opened, bearing broken, sharp teeth. Behind them, a black tongue was visible. Its mouth reeked of rotten meat. The monster shook me, intending either to break my neck or smash my head against the trunk, and then my daughter laughed. She laughed heartily in my pocket, just as she did when I caught her and started tickling her. "Daddy, no. Daddy, stop," she would say in those moments, laughing. And now that laugh came from my pocket. The creature froze, listening. It seemed as if the whole world froze, listening to that ringing laugh. Then the giant lowered its head and began to rummage through my coat with its hand. "No, no," I wanted to scream. "Don't you dare touch her. Not her. Take the others. Take them all, but not her." but I couldn't make a sound, only gasping as I dangled like a worm on a hook. And it, meanwhile, stuck its paw into my pocket and, tearing the fabric, pulled out the ball. It looked at it carefully, then glanced at the sack lying in the snow, then at me, and finally at the ball. And it understood. It understood why I hadn't put it with the others, why I had kept it with me. It understood that the contents of this ball had special significance for me. There was a crack of glass, and I saw a crack run across the ball. With all my might, I pounded my right hand against the hand holding me, while with my left, I tried to reach the ball, and with my legs, I wildly kicked the tree trunk in search of support. But none of it helped. The creature continued to squeeze the ball containing my daughter's soul with its knobby, blood-stained fingers. The web of cracks grew before my eyes. Until the last moment, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. No, it's a deception, a mockery, a threat, that's all. It won't do that to my... She was laughing. Still laughing when the ball suddenly burst in the giant's hand and shattered into dozens of shards that fell from its palm. Following them, the little flame flew into the snow. It flew and laughed so joyfully, so carefree as it fell through the darkness. And then it went out, and the laughter suddenly stopped. The monster looked at me again, opened its vile, lipless mouth, and from it came that horrible sound, a parody of my daughter's laughter. It didn't know how to laugh, didn't feel anything, but it wanted to. That was why it kidnapped them. It wanted to know what happiness and joy were, and who better than children knew this? Rage clouded my eyes. Gasping, I began to pound its hand with my fists, and though there was no sense in it, I kept hitting and hitting, gasping and kicking. And the creature watched me with its white, expressionless eyes. It wasn't in a hurry to kill me. It was absorbing my emotions. Just as it absorbed the children's joy, it was now absorbing my grief. Without realizing it, it drew closer to me, savoring the new emotions it was receiving. The monster's mouth opened and closed, clacking its jaws, and a hoarse, stifled groan came from its throat, just like my own. Seeing my chance, the only and last one, I grabbed the creature's head. I plunged my fingers directly into the wound made by the axe, deeply embedding them in the viscous goo. The giant howled and let me go. Sliding down the trunk into the snow, I broke into a hoarse cough. The world around me spun, my throat and lungs burned with fire. I lifted my head and saw the giant bent over, holding its wound with both hands and groaning deeply. Black resin flowed through his fingers. Without stopping the cough, I looked around and quickly found what I wanted. The axe lay in the snow just a step away from me. I reached for it, grabbed the end of the handle, and pulled it toward me. Then I took a firm grip and, without standing up, struck. The blade embedded itself under the giant's knee, and it collapsed. I, on the other hand, jumped to my feet and, roaring just like this monster, brought the axe down on it again. The monster even managed to shield itself with its hand, but the blow was so powerful that it severed its fingers and simultaneously tore off its jaw. The creature crashed into the snow, and I struck again. And again, and again. I screamed and hit, I don't know how many times, many, very many. I hit until I could no longer lift the axe. Bones cracked and broke under my blows, and when it was all over, all that remained of this creature was a mess of bones and flesh, drowning in a pool of black goo. Exhausted, I let the axe slip from my stiffened fingers and, throwing myself into the snowdrifts, began to search for the fragile soul of my daughter. She had to be there, and I intended to save her. I believed I could save her, that I would find her and bring her home in my hands. Crawling through the snow, I called out her name over and over, in tears. I called, begged her to return to me, but it was all in vain. She no longer laughed. I returned to the town the next day, barely able to move my legs, frozen and barely alive, but with a sack full of balls. Each of them was someone's life, someone's soul. Returning them to the children was not difficult, but I don't remember how it was done. I lay in a feverish delirium for 10 days, and when I came to, our town was once again filled with children's laughter. Only her laughter was missing. Out of my companions, 3 survived. The first 2 who got lost never made it out of the blizzard. They were found a few days later, frozen. Another had his leg broken by a falling tree, but his friends managed to carry him back to town. I wasn't angry at them for not climbing into the ravine to save me, because then, perhaps, we wouldn't have stumbled upon the monster's house and wouldn't have saved the children. This house, by the way, I never managed to find again. I tried for many days. I wanted to burn everything there to the ground, but it had vanished. I hope it's gone forever, although there's no certainty that this creature, whose nature remains an unfathomable mystery to us, has perished and will never return. That's why I won't stop reminding future generations of our town that in one cold winter, evil can come from the thicket and once again begin hunting for carefree children's souls. I won't let them forget, and I won't let myself forget the choice I made that night. To save everyone or just one, but the most precious? I often think since then, if I were to return to that moment, would I act differently? I think, and I find no answer. Or perhaps I'm just afraid to find it. However, sometimes, walking deep in the forest thicket, I seem to hear her laughter. Maybe my daughter's soul is still there, her flame hasn't gone out, and one day I'll manage to find it? Silly? Well, we all need to believe in something.